All right, guys, this one's about functions and procedures again, but this one's about library routines. Now, library routines, again, could either be a function or a procedure, but they have been predefined. It means, in other words, that they exist in a program library that we're using, and we can just call them to do certain things that we want them to do. So in your examination, you're expected to use these pre-written functions. Now, in your examination, you will be provided with something called an appendix or a slip that will contain a bunch of pre-built functions and with small descriptions so that you can actually use them. Now, what are you actually expected to do? Well, the first thing that you're expected to do is actually write a function or procedure header and then write the commands inside that will enable it to do what it was designed to do. In the previous video, we created a function called average calculator that takes three parameters and then essentially it adds the three parameters and divides by 3 to find the average. Okay? Now, in your examination, you will obviously get a much more complex function to design. And part of that design is writing the correct header and the correct ending statement. And the ending statement, when you're done with your function, is end function. Okay? Right. The second thing that you're expected to do is to use functions in order to collect data. Now, in order for me to use a function, I have to assign the function to a variable. As you can see here, I've got a variable called letters, and I am assigning the function that's called length, okay, with a parameter of Stavros, which is a string. Now, the length function that we see here, essentially all it does is count the number of characters in a string. In this situation, it will count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 characters. And once that's done, okay, letters will contain the number 7. Okay, so that's the second thing that we need to do. The third thing that you will be expected to do is to use functions in order to convert data. Now, there's a bunch of different built-in functions that convert data into different data types. For example, string to num converts a string value into a numeric value. So for example, if I pass the string value of 65 into this function, number will be equal to the integer of 65. So essentially, this will convert 65, which is in this situation, as you can see the quotes, a string, into this, which is actually a integer value. Okay? Now here's another example. Num to string. This will do the opposite. This will convert a numeric value, a real value actually, this should be 0.0, okay, into a string. So this will become 65 like this, okay? Now here's another one. This one doesn't really convert, but it essentially, well, actually it does convert. It gets a real number and makes it into an integer. So 65.4 will become 65, okay? This doesn't round up or round down. It just removes the decimals. So essentially, you will have to use a variety of these functions to conclude to an answer in your examinations, okay? You could also combine certain what you call them functions. So for example, let's say I have a variable called number again, okay, and I want to convert a string, okay, into an integer, but that string is, for example, a decimal, okay? So I'm going to write my int, okay, and this int takes one parameter. This takes a real number and it converts it into an integer, Now, instead of putting a real number, for example, 65.4, I'm going to put string to num inside, okay, with this value. Okay. Now, if you take a look on what I'm showing you here and what's on top, okay, the integer function takes a real number as a parameter. Okay. Now, I didn't put a real number as a parameter. I put another function inside it. Now, my other function is something that returns or can return a real number. Okay. So string to num of 65.4 will return the value of 65.4. So this will look like this. Let me show you. So this part of my function, this parameter, okay, is essentially will give me this result. Okay. Now that means that string to num 65.4, okay, is essentially going to return a real number. So that means I can use the return value inside my integer value. Okay, and by the time this is finished, number will be equal to 65.4. Sorry, 65. Okay, all right, let's get rid of all this. And let's take a look at the next one. We're going to need to use functions to isolate parts of a string. This is part of a different chapter called string manipulation. And there's certain functions like mid, left, right, length, and so forth that can be used to take parts of strings and isolate them. So for example here, the word variable will be assigned the mid function of and it has three parameters: a string parameter, an integer, and another integer. Now, how does the mid function work? The mid function, that should be written in capitals, okay, takes a string, okay, and the first integer parameter is what indicates the start position. So if I count to 4, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're looking at the letter C. And 8, which is the last parameter, is how many characters we're going to take away with us. So if I start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So essentially, the word will now be, computer. Okay? Now, the left function works in a sort of similar way, but it doesn't give us as much control. If I was to perform this statement here, okay, the left function starts from the left-hand side, from here, and using this parameter, which is an integer, it shows how many letters to take away from the left. So in this situation, 1, 2, 3. So in this situation, this is what will be returned to the word, so to the variable word. Okay. Now, in order to achieve string manipulation functions or activities that they will ask you, you will need to use a combination of functions, including left, right, mid, length, and so forth, which we will discuss in a later on video. Right. I hope this helped. I'll catch you in the next one.